Okay, it's been a really long day. So I got to Belgrade yesterday afternoon, and since then I've given one lecture, two television interviews, 2 newspaper interviews, a little coffee in between each time. And so I don't know about you, but I want to start this in a way that I've never started a lecture before, because I need a little help right now, and I need to meditate. Okay, so I need you to help me meditate. Okay, so really, just bear with me for a second. Maybe we turn down the noise just a little bit. It's a bit loud. Okay, so what I want you to do is to close your eyes and put your hands on your knees. And I'm watching you so I can see who's doing it and who's not. And take a deep breath in and take a deep breath out. The people at home who are on the website can also do this. Take a deep breath in. And take a deep breath out. Now, I really need this after this long day. One more, in and out. Now, as you're breathing, I want you to imagine that I'm now pouring concrete into this room on the floor. Now, take a deep breath in and a breath out. And this concrete is going around your feet, and it's starting to dry. You can feel it drying around your feet. Take a breath in and take a breath out. And now you're trying to move your feet. You can try to move them, but they're stuck. They're not moving. Take one more breath. And now imagine for a second that I've walked out of this room, turned off all the lights, closed the door. Now open your eyes. And now imagine what your life would be like if you were stuck here in this room in the center of science, and you're literally cemented in place. What type of problems would you have? How would that affect your life? You could say, yell out an answer. How would that affect your life? Food, water, very quickly you would start getting hungry or thirsty. Other problems?
Medication.
What?
Medication.
Well, maybe you're healthy though. Toilet. Well, you could go to the toilet, no problem. That might cause a problem for her. But you could go to the toilet, no problem. Now, there's lots of problems we would have here. You could think about, you can also get other needs. How do you find a mate? And you're sort of stuck here. Can you reach? Can you not reach? Lots of problems. And if you haven't understood, this is the life of a plant. We can move around freely, but the plants are stuck. They have to survive in one place, in a completely changing environment, not knowing when they're going to get food, not knowing when they're going to get water, not knowing when they're going to be sick, and not knowing if they're going to find a way of reproducing. Because we all have to eat, we all have to drink, we all have to stay healthy, and we all have to reproduce if we want to survive as a species. And that'll help us understand what a plant is, and what a plant has to know. So, can we say that a plant sees the sun? I'm going to use a lot of anthropomorphological wording here. But can we see the sun. Does the plant see the sun? We smell flowers. But do flowers smell other flowers? Of course plants smell, but do they smell actively? We hear music. What does a plant hear? Does it even hear? Does it even care about for Mozart? We taste wonderful food. Here, some of you have had great food so far for me. What does a plant taste? Of course, plants taste really good, but do they taste themselves? And we feel the grass in our toes when it's not this temperature outside, but does the grass feel us walking on it? And this ballerina is keeping an exquisite balance. I can't even try to do this right now. It would be embarrassing. But how does a plant keep its balance in nature? So thinking of all these things, if we look at the forest, can we say that these plants in the forest have senses? So let's just start with a very simple question. What do plants see? Well, let's define what we mean by seeing. So, this is what I see from my office at Tel Aviv University in Israel. Just to make you a little jealous, that's the Mediterranean Sea. So that's where I was yesterday at 25 degrees. Now, if I was blind, that's what I would see, nothing. So it's very clear to us the difference of being blind and seeing. Seeing nothing and having the ability to see. But if I would take somebody who's blind, who's seeing just this blackness, and through some surgical intervention, allow them to differentiate between light and dark, would that be considered sight? Sure, they're not seeing pictures, but it's definitely better than just seeing blackness. And if I would allow this person to differentiate between red and blue, that's definitely an improvement of black and white, or an improvement on nothing. So if you can accept the fact that seeing is not just seeing pictures, then plants see at least this well. And actually, you don't need me to tell you that. You already know intuitively that plants see. Because what happens to your plants when you put them on a windowsill? They start bending to the direction of the light. You know, they start going like this. And here, this is a time-lapse photography where every 24 hours, the direction of the light was changed. And you can see that these plants, while they themselves aren't moving, they are growing either towards the light. So obviously, plants respond to light. In other words, they see the light. One of the first people to study this, and this is an important lesson for all of us, and this is the book we should all read, was none other than Charles Darwin. Darwin was one of the all-time great scientists. As you know, you probably all know Darwin because of his theory of evolution. But Darwin published a book in the late 19th century called The Power of Movement in Plants. It's a book we still teach from to undergraduate students. And in this book of plant biology, Darwin started studying how plants respond to the environment. This is one of his own drawings from his book. And what Darwin said is that the plant is so sensitive to light that it will bend even to light that's so dim that I can't read the watch that's in my pocket watch. Okay? So here, even over 100 years ago, Darwin had described that plants respond to light signals. But what's probably more surprising is not only do plants respond to light, but they differentiate between colors. In other words, if I give a plant blue light on one side and red light on the other, it will always turn towards the blue light. In other words, just like us, plants can differentiate between colors. Now you might say, okay, it only sees blue. But actually, it uses the red light for other things. It uses the red light to know how long the day is, when to flower. So just like that we have in our retina receptors for blue light and for red light, plants have in their cells different proteins, different receptors that are sensitive to blue light or that are sensitive to red light. And actually, in the laboratory, we can make plants that are colorblind. I'm sure you know people who are colorblind. What happens when someone is colorblind? They have a mutation in the gene that codes for one of the color receptors. I can make a plant that has a mutation in the photoreceptor for blue light, and if I give it blue light from the side, it'll keep growing up. It will never turn towards the blue light. Why? It's colorblind. It's lost the receptor for that. So I hope I've convinced you that plants see, and probably that's not so difficult for you to understand. But if plants can see, what do they smell? What are these trees here in this forest smelling? So I want to show you a movie that demonstrates a plant's ability to smell. What we have in this movie are two plants. This is a tomato plant, and this is a parasitic plant called cuscuta. Now, in order to survive, this cuscuta plant has to find another one to grow onto, to latch onto, and then it sucks the nutrients from that plant. Now look, what looks like random movements in the beginning become directional. How does the cuscuta find the tomato? Is it seeing it? Is it just lucky, the first thing it hits onto? But again, look at its turning. It's no longer turning so much to the right, it's turning much more to the left. All right, so the hypothesis is that it smells the tomato plant. All right, hypothesis alone and proof alone. How can we prove that? So here's an experiment that was done about a decade ago at Penn State University. And what we have here are 3 chambers. And these 3 chambers are isolated, but only connected through air ducts. In the middle, we have a pot that has seeds of the cuscuta, the parasitic plant. On your right, there's a tomato plant. And on your left, there's an empty pot. And when the cuscuta germinates, it always grows, or almost always grows, to the direction of the air coming from the tomato plot, which lets you think that it's actually smelling it. So we can do another experiment. Well, if it's smelling it, then you should be able to make a perfume. Okay? So let's take the leaves, make a perfume, spray the perfume on a piece of cotton. Now there's no plant, there's only the vapor. You know, a tomato, the tomato. Okay? And you get the exact same result. The cuscuta will grow in the direction of the smell of the tomato. Now comes, I think, the most interesting question. Does cuscuta like tomato? Or does it like green? Or not green, does it like the smell of green plants? So what experiment can we do? Give it another plant. Okay, now has anyone here ever drank wheat seedling juice? You know, it's something used in health. They say it can reduce cholesterol if you take wheat seedlings and make a juice out of it, drink it every morning. My wife had me doing it for several months. Someone's ever drunk it? What's it taste like? It's awful, right? You drink it and you want to say moo. Okay? This is a true result, okay? So if you give the wheat germ, the wheatgrass on one side and an empty pot on the other, the cuscuta grows the other way from the wheatgrass. Not only does it not want it, it grows away. It would rather go to an empty pot. Okay? Once I read this result, I stopped drinking it because if the cuscuta is smart enough not to go to that, then I'm not going to be going to it. And of course, if you give the plant the choice of either, it will go to the tomato. So we see here that plants, not only can they respond to volatile chemicals, I mean, that's what smelling is. We have a volatile chemical in the air. They have taste. Not in terms of tasting, they have preferences. I prefer tomatoes and I hate wheat. Okay? Which leads to the question then, what do trees talk about? Why can I ask this question, what do trees talk about? It's because of the following finding. We know that if you take a willow tree, and if this willow tree is attacked by beetles, the attacked tree starts giving off a gas into the air. After lots of research, we know that this gas is called methyl jasmonate. There's no exam, so you don't have to write it down. Okay? The tree that absorbs the methyl jasmonate starts making defensive chemicals that are poisonous to beetles. And so now this tree is now resistant to the beetles. Now when this research was first published in the early 1980s, the popular press loved it because it gave the idea that one tree is yelling to another tree, protect yourself, watch out, you know. Whereas members of the scientific community were very reticent about accepting this because it just sounds a bit too much. So now we get into interpretation. Are the two trees talking to each other? Or there's another possibility. Is the second tree just eavesdropping to the first tree? Why? Because when the one branch is attacked, it's giving off this gas that is also absorbed by the second branch on the same tree. And we now know that other branches also become resistant to the beetles. So it could just be that one branch is talking to another branch, and the neighbor is just enjoying the conversation. Now, we don't have plant psychologists. I can't ask the tree, what did you mean? But the fact that there's communication, chemical communication between plants is a fact. There's lots of ecological evolutionary models that can explain this altruism. For example, the more that other trees are resistant, less beetles there'll be in general, and so then you're protecting yourself. So this is a type of chemical communication, and if you think about it, we have chemical communication all the time between us. Some of it we're aware of, and some of it we're not aware of. In literature, at least in English, I guess in Serbian, you have the idea that there's the smell of fear was in the air. What is the smell of fear? It's pheromones that we're giving off. Or if you're smelling a barbecue and you start salivating, you know that there's food around. So there's lots of chemical communication going on among us also. So plants can respond to volatile signals in the air. So we could say that plants smell. So if a plant smells, then what does it feel? And now here I'm not talking about, oh, I feel happy, I feel sad, but what does it feel physically? Well, take a look at this Venus flytrap. All right, now I have a question. You know, often when I show this, people get really upset when the frog gets eaten. No one really cares that the fly gets eaten, but the frog getting eaten, ooh. But notice, I want to notice one thing. This, it's, the Venus flytrap, it's a real son of a bitch. It waits till it's in the middle. Okay, it knows it's there, but it only closes when the fly or that little toad has worked its way to the middle. So there's an awareness of position. Now we know in human biology and animal biology that shaking stunts growth. You know, you're not supposed to shake your kids, right? And I used to have a slide about that, and someone told me to take it off, that it was in bad taste. But it also stunts the growth of plants. This is our favorite lab plant. It's called Arabidopsis. It's like wild mustard. And these are both 7-week-old trays of plants. And the only difference between them is that the one on your left was grown normally, and the one on the right, the scientist came by and touched it with its hand 3 times a day. Now, why would Arabidopsis care that someone touches it? But you see, when it touches it, it's much shorter. Actually, if you look at its stems, it's much fatter. Now, picture for yourself. Now, I don't think it really knows that there's a scientist touching it. But picture maybe a tree in a valley. A tree in a valley is tall and majestic with lots of leaves and lots of branches. And the same species that's on the top of a mountain, where it's exposed to the wind, is short and fat and very few leaves. Now, intuitively, you say that the wind damaged the tree. Now, let's go back to our meditation. How is this tree going to survive? It's only going to survive by changing its biology. It's not that the wind damaged the tree. The tree felt the wind and said to itself, stop elongating, become fat, and make fewer branches. If it hadn't learned to do that, if it didn't have the ability to do that, it would be blown over and die. So this is an evolutionary adaptation to respond to wind. Without that, it dies. Now imagine us if we would become short and fat if we're in the wind, you know? Not a good excuse for obesity. So we could see that plants feel their physical environment. So if we've seen that a plant smells and a plant hears, and a plant sees and a plant feels, now comes the question, what does a plant hear? And now here's my question for you. What type of music do you think plants prefer?
My type.
Your telephone music?
My type of music.
Your type of music? Anyone have any other guesses? Classical music. Who said that? It's okay. What type of music do you like most? Punk. Okay, well, that was an important question. You'll see why in a second. Now, I don't want to disappoint you, but so while people are usually surprised, wow, plants see red and blue, that's amazing. Plants smell, that's amazing. Plants can actually feel, wow. Oh, of course plants respond to music. Oh, yeah, and it's going to be classical. I get this all over the world. It's not culturally based. It's all over the world. And why is this? It's because of this silly little book here. The Sound of Music in Plants, which was published in the late 1960s, early 1970s. And it was published by this woman here, Dorothy Redelak. Now, this is not to make fun of her, because she was a product of her time. Dorothy Redelak was an American housewife who at age 50 went back to college to get a degree in musicology. And she had a science requirement. Okay? We all have science requirements if you're a humanity, you know. And as part of her science requirement, she had to do an experiment. Now, this was the early 1960s. Those among us who were young at that time know that it was not the easiest time in American society, at least. And there were a lot of people who thought that rock and roll was dangerous to American youth. And she wanted to do an experiment that would prove that rock and roll is dangerous. Now, there's a problem here from a scientific point of view, because we never want to do an experiment to prove something. Okay, because then we're already assuming, we already know what the result is going to be. Now, here's her experiment. Okay, this is taken from her book. There are 4 plants here. I should probably remember the order of it. This is Mozart, and this is actually Ravi Shankar music. So it's also classical Indian music. This is Jimi Hendrix, and I don't remember what the other one is. Now, you look at this, and you wonder how I made it to adulthood. Actually, you look at this, and you wonder how you made it to adulthood also, if you like punk music, you know. Because this is really scary. Now, this was never published in a scientific paper. No scientific publication would accept it. She published it in a book, which is dangerous for me to say because I also published it in a book. But this book wasn't even that widely distributed. It was self-published. Unfortunately, though, it was quoted in The Secret Life of Plants. And I'm sure that that was also published in Serbian. No? Yes, yeah. You know, a wonderful, incredibly well-written book. And it wasn't actually intended to be taken seriously by the people who wrote it. But one of the chapters is about her music. And this became accepted as fact. Stevie Wonder wrote music for a movie for it. And everyone's convinced that people like, that plants like classical music. Now, if you look through the literature, there's thousands of articles talking about plants responding to light, thousands of articles, plants responding to volatile chemicals, 5, maybe 6 articles about plants responding to music. And interestingly, in each one, the plants grew better in the music that the scientists preferred. So does this mean I think that they were making up their results? No, I think we're just better gardeners when we're listening to music that we like. And the truth of the matter is, if there was such an effect here, scientists would have seen it. I mean, this is an experiment that's very easy to do. And no one's been able to show that plants actually have musical taste. Now, we could explain Jimi Hendrix if the plant was right next to the speaker and there's a lot of bass turned up. What would happen to the plant? What happens to plants when you shake them? They get small. But the same thing would happen with Bartok also, you know. So it has nothing to do with musical taste, everything to do with how the experiment is set up. So does that mean that plants don't hear? Actually, we can never say plants don't hear. What we have to, though, look at is, though, if a plant hears, what would be an ecologically relevant sound for a plant to listen to? These plants here in the forest aren't listening to Mozart. They didn't grow up listening to music. So maybe we as scientists have been doing the wrong experiment. Now, over the past year or two, there have been slowly showing in the scientific literature hints that plants may respond to sound waves through the air. Now, what would a plant listen to? A plant could be listening to the sound of running water. That would make sense. If a plant could sense the vibrations of running water, it would make sense that that's how the roots would know which direction to grow. Maybe a plant listens to the very high sounds of the wings of pollinators. Now, these are very difficult experiments to do, how to record this, play it back, and do controlled experiments. So if a plant hears, it's going to be in something that we're completely deaf to. But I wouldn't be surprised if we find out in the next 5 or 10 years that plants actually do respond to sound. So if we look at plant senses of sight and smell and taste and touch and hearing and keeping their balance, can plants remember things? You know, what do we remember? We remember sensual input. We remember the smell of something in our house. If you close your eyes, you could probably taste something your mother once made for you. We remember weather, can you remember a really bad winter? And what's maybe incredibly surprising and a little disconcerting is that plants remember these things too. Plants remember past weather. Wheat knows if it's been through the winter or not. And it uses that information to know when to flower. Actually, you could put wheat seeds in a freezer and then plant it, and it'll flower right away. It'll think it's gone through the winter. Plants not only remember weather, they actually remember to take their memories and transfer it through the generations. Their children, their offspring, respond to things that the parents, went through. This is a type of memory which is called epigenetic memory, and we now know that we also have epigenetic memory. There are things that you go through as adults, or even when you went through as children, which will influence the biology of your children. Now, there are mothers who always think they're guilty. Maybe you are. No, but there's lots of ways of information being passed. The Venus flytrap, by the way, how did the fly know it got to the? How did the flytrap know it got to the middle? Here, there's a thing of short-term memory. There are hairs on the flytrap. If you touch one hair, the flytrap doesn't close. If you touch 2 hairs, then it closes. But the 2 hairs have to be touched within 30 seconds of each other. If you touch one hair, count to 20, touch the second hair, it'll close. Touch one hair, count to 50, touch the second hair, it'll stay open. In other words, it's forgotten that the first hair is touched. This is a mechanism that allows the plant to know that it's a big bug. Because if a small one, it's not worth eating. So plants even have short-term memories, and that's an electrical memory. It's encoded electrically, just like we have short-term memories, which we're losing as we get older, which are encoded electrically. So considering all this, can we say that plants are conscious? And I'm not even going to touch that question, because I'm not a philosopher. Okay, I'll let you answer that question on your own. All right, so why is this important? And how can this affect how we teach science? Why, so first of all, so this book that I wrote 6 years ago was published 5 years ago. By the way, the second edition is coming out in 2 weeks in English and in German. I don't know when the Serbian second edition will come out. I'll give you a few more years. Has now been the basis for an online course given by Coursera, a MOOC. Have you heard of MOOCs? Massively online open courses. This was produced by Tel Aviv University. It's a free course that anyone can take. Now, my goal in writing the book was that I was a little disappointed, first of all, how little students knew about plant biology, because in high school, all they learn about is human biology, cancer, Alzheimer, neurobiology. Second, how little they were interested in it, and how surprised they were when I told them, I'm just talking about science students, that plants was differentiated between red and blue. But I also saw that as soon as students started being engaged, they might turn the way around from studying plant biology, from studying medicine to maybe studying plant biology. We need to get students, some of our best students, also involved in plant biology. So I have 2 classes online. One is called Understanding Plants Part 1, What a Plant Knows. Over 120,000 students in 83 countries have already taken this class. It was an amazing experience for me in understanding how online learning works. And then there's a second class called Understanding Plants Part 2, Fundamentals of Plant Biology, which is more hardcore plant biology. Only about 20,000 people have taken this one. This is for people who are not afraid of chemical terms. More amazingly, though, the Israeli public school system has now adopted these classes as part of its curriculum for high school biology, where high school students are taking this class not to learn only about plant biology, but to use what a plant knows as a way of learning about how science works. What is a hypothesis? What is pseudoscience? How do we build an experiment? It never occurred to me when I wrote the book that it would lead to an online class, that it would be then part of a curriculum for high school students. You know, influencing students all through Israel, and it could be doing all through the world. We actually allow students in Israel who have taken this class to get extra 5 bonus points on their entrance exams to the university. And then they also get credit for it within the university. So they actually come into university with some credit. But again, why is this important? I mean, it's good for my own lab. I could get more students. It's interesting. I think we're all fascinated by it. But let's remember something, okay? Everything we do is dependent on plants. Right now, you are all breathing plant product, oxygen. Most of us are wearing dead plants. Okay, I just drank some dead plants in coffee. We eat plants. We burn dead plants in our cars. You know, you're sitting, or is this plastic or wood? Okay, so let's pretend it's wood. You're sitting on dead plants. Our houses are made of plants. Everything we do is plant dependent. Nothing the plants do is human dependent. Actually, that's not true. Everything a plant does in agriculture is human dependent. Nothing the plant does in the forest is human dependent. Which brings us to this slide. That 10% of the world's population is hungry. I'm not talking malnourished, I'm talking about old-fashioned hunger. Now, when I was a kid, there were only 3 billion people in the world. And we have today more than 7 billion, on our way to 9 billion soon. Out of this 7 billion people in the world, 10% go to bed hungry every day. Okay? Another 33%, a third of the world, is undernourished. They're getting enough, you know, to make themselves feel full, but they're not getting a healthy diet. Another 12%, and something got wrong in the, this should say obese, overweight. This is something new in history. You know, another 12% of the world's population is obese. So that actually only 45% of the world is food secure. I hope most of the people in this world are, in this room are. So what are the challenges that we're going to have in this century to feed the world? Well, first, the first challenge, as I said, is the growing population. By 2050, we'll have about 9 billion people in the world. And the majority of that 9 billion is going to be in the developing world. It's not going to be in Serbia, unless they keep coming in, which is another problem which we'll get to in a second. Okay? The second problem is, as we have more people in the world, there's less area available to grow crops. This is my hometown in Israel, so this is a new housing development, okay? All of this 20 years ago was agricultural land where it was growing famous Israeli oranges. Now it's all growing houses. Actually, the amount of agricultural land is going down. I don't remember the statistic, but that if 24% of the world was available for agriculture in the year 1950, more or less, now we're down to about 20%. So, you know, the more people we have, the less land there is available for agriculture. So there's a problem here. How are we going to feed more people with less land? Now, the way we've managed to feed the world, and I'll give you I won't just be negative. There's less hunger in the world today, proportionally, than ever before in human history. At 7 billion people, there's proportionally less hunger than there was 50 years ago with 3 billion. How is that possible? It's because every year, for the past 50 years, yields per unit of land, per acre, have gone up. And this has gone up because of modern agriculture. So we're getting more and more food per yield, per unit of land, and that's how we can feed the world. But the problem is that these gains in yield have started to level off. We seem to have reached a plateau of genetic potential. So we need some new technology which will allow us to break this. And that's only going to be coming through research. And research costs money. And the third one is, if you haven't heard, climate's changing. You know, we go through droughts. Climate is getting hotter and hotter. We're getting desertification in huge amounts of China, huge amounts of Australia. Because of modern agriculture, I mean, the good news is modern agriculture has enabled us to feed the world. And given the choice between feeding a child and not feeding a child, I think every parent here will choose to feed a child. But one of the costs has been, for example, the polluting of the Gulf of Mexico, south of the United States, where all of the fertilizers are run off into the Gulf of Mexico, causing a huge killing zone. So modern agriculture is not sustainable. So together with this unsustainability of modern agriculture, together with climate change, floods and storms and desertification and a rising temperature, you know, this is a perfect storm for disaster. And I'm not being Malthusian. But what we're seeing is not, and then there's political problems, or what I call food security, ancient and modern. For those of you who went to Sunday school as kids, you know that in the Bible they said there was famine in the land of Canaan, and the people of Israel went down from Canaan into Egypt. That Jacob took his kids and all the Jewish people into Canaan. Why into Egypt? Why did the Jews go into Egypt? No food in Canaan. There was a drought. There was famine. Famine causes people to move. What's happening in Europe today? I don't even know where this was taken. It could have been in your own country. You know, these are Syrian refugees walking into Europe. You know it very well. Why are they leaving Syria? War is a problem, but they don't have any food. You know, people, so you know, food, people, if you look all through human history, there is not one major part of human history that can't be traced back to changes in food availability. Even Columbus looking for a route to the east. Why were the Europeans so, you know, so set on finding a route to the east? It wasn't because they were looking for gold. So they were looking for spices. Why were they looking for spices? Because the food in Europe was rancid. We know that the Chinese knew about North America, but they never went that way because China in the Middle Ages was food secure, a very food secure society. And even in modern times, as you know, food insecurity can lead to social and political insecurity. Now, this is a demonstration of about 300,000 people. And if you look closely, I'm in here somewhere. It's a demonstration in Tel Aviv, not because of the Palestinian problem, not because of terrorism, not because of Syria, and not because of politics. Because of one thing, a 27% increase in the cost of cottage cheese. A 27% increase in the cost of cottage cheese, together with other increases in the cost of living, but cottage cheese became the focus, did something that nothing else managed to do, which is stop people from being complacent and take them out into the street. Now, in Israel, we love our cottage cheese. If you ever come, we have great cheeses, okay? And it's our staple. Now, the interesting thing is, why did the price of cottage cheese go up so much? Now, this might be a little bit of a conspiracy theory, but one of the ideas is that the Israeli company was trying to be sold to a Chinese company, and Ernst & Young advised them to raise their price to increase their profits, to increase their, you know, because they said your price of cottage cheese is so low, no one will know the difference. Anyway, you know, a business advice almost caused the downfall of the government, and the prices went back down afterwards. So anyway, so even in a secure, financially secure Western country, food insecurity can lead to political instability. So it behooves us all to work for a food secure world. So as Tanya mentioned in the beginning, I founded 5 years ago at Tel Aviv University a Center for Food Security, where we're trying to bring academics together from diverse fields, not only plant biology and plant genetics, but also economists who understand the implications of international development and how to use technology and innovation in agriculture. People in public health who understand nutrition, and even people in engineering who work on remote sensing. And working with students in Israel, students in Europe, and with students in the developing world. And what we've learned from this experience is a couple things. I'll take of you 3 take-home lessons. First of all, I want to tell you, I forgot this one. With all this, I'm an optimist. I don't want you to go home, oh my God, we're all going to die. Why am I an optimist? I'm an optimist because of India. Now, why would India make you optimistic, if anyone's ever... So, again, when I was a kid, people my age, you might remember that in the 1960s, there were 700 million people in India, and India was on the brink of famine. Pictures of distended stomachs all through India. Massive foreign aid staved off the famine, especially in states like Bihar. Okay, this was like the Biafra of the 1960s. Today, there's 1.4 billion people in India. Twice as much as in 1960, 1.2 billion? Well, maybe tomorrow morning it'll be 1.4. India is today a net food exporter. Now, if someone would have told me, well, I was a little kid, but in 1967, that India with 1.2 billion would be a food exporter, no one would have believed it. Now, it's not to say there's not hunger in India. There's plenty of hunger in India, but it's economic hunger, not agronomic hunger. How has India managed to feed itself and become a net food exporter? Only because they adopted technology and innovation. And if India can do that, the rest of the world surely can. So, back to our lesson. So the first lesson is that there's no magic bullet. There's no simple solutions. You know, we need to have our feet on the ground. For example, this is one of our graduate students who's working in Nepal, trying to understand how small-scale farmers in Nepal were using modern technologies or willing to use modern technologies. There's not going to be one, you know, we can't come to the developing world and say, we have the answers, here, use it. That doesn't work. You have to have your feet on the ground. There's no one answer. You need a full toolbox. Second is partnerships are essential. We need biologists working with economists, working with engineers, working with people in the government, yes, people in the government, working with people in the private sector because profit is the best way of getting people to do things. We need people from the developing world working with people from the with the established world, people in the new economies and the old economies. We need students and professors and also journalists working together. And the third thing is, and this is probably key for us as academics, is multidisciplinary education and research are essential. We can no longer train people who live in a silo. We have to train people who are literate, students, who are literate in more than one field. We have to know people who are in the ground, who can work with each other, who work in the laboratory, or who even work, in greenhouses. We need everything working together. We have to be thinking multidisciplinary. And why do we do this? And I just might want to end with a quote from the former director of the FAO. Hunger is not an issue of charity. It's an issue of justice. No parent should have to go to bed worried that his children are not going to have what to eat. And that's why we do what we do. Thanks very much. Okay. Any questions? Yeah.
Well, thank you,
sorry.
Danny.
Yeah.
This is so The talk was so inspiring, and thank you for this multidimensional and multidisciplinary talk. And we have time for questions, of course. So feel free to speak to this wonderful man. He surely loves to spread his knowledge, so make use of him. So here we go.
Well, what do you think about the issue of plant suffering? It was in the media lately about this question: do plants suffer? Do they feel pain when we eat them? And vegans usually.
Okay, so that's a great question. Do plants suffer? You know, so we need to understand a couple of things here and define a couple of things. First, let's talk about pain. Okay? Can we accept the idea that pain is subjective? Okay? What might hurt you a lot may not just sort of bother him a little bit. There's no one definition of pain. Second of all, not all tissue damage equals pain. For example, a brain surgeon will tell you that in our brains, there are no pain receptors. You do brain surgery without anesthetizing the brain, and you're cutting it up. So, you know, tissue damage does not equal pain. Suffering, at least according to the psychological definition, requires two things: damage and perceived emotional stress. So we all know people who are completely healthy and are really miserable. On the other hand, you might know people who might have cancer and are actually very happy people. So suffering is a state of mind. So once we take all those things into consideration, and then consider that biologically, plants do not have pain receptors, and that emotional stress necessitates a frontal cortex. And plants, in the absence of a brain, definitely don't have a frontal cortex. I think it's pretty safe to say that plants don't suffer. So if you're a vegan or a vegetarian, keep chewing, and your plants might know you're chewing them, but they don't really give a damn.
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions? Come on, guys. Oh, okay. So this side is more active, please.
I wanted to ask you about mycorrhizal fungi, and how they play a role in the communication of plants.
Well, we could go into a whole other lecture. Mycorrhizal fungi are fungi that are present in the soil, and they make these long interconnected networks, which often connect roots to roots. And so just like there's exchange of information from plant to plant, there's exchange of information from plant to fungus, from fungus to plant. So as scientists, we often work as what's called reductionist science. We try to isolate a system. And that's very good for finding very distinct mechanisms. But in the end, everything is interconnected. And the study of how fungus senses the environment, how fungi interact is another, I mean, they have the exact same senses. Sure.
I just have one question when it comes to us. Do plants have some kind of terminology when it comes to family? Like that,
Can a plant, well, so was the question about, do plants recognize family?
Yeah, like is there a mother and child?
Okay, so first of all, we have to understand two things here. I'll give you two different answers. One, there's not plants, just like there's not animals. There are, 200,000 different species of higher plants. And they're as different from each other as animals are from each other. Just like that dogs have an incredibly evolved sense of smell, and we can't smell anything relative to them. So we can't talk about plants as do plants recognize. But so that's number one. Number two, yeah, there's actually incredibly cool research that's gone on over the past decade, more or less, and this is in the new version of the book, was not in the old version of the book, that there's a plant that we've shown that, not we, my colleagues have shown, that if the roots of a mother and a offspring are in the same pot, they will grow apart. Okay? They recognize their offspring. But if you separate the mother and the son and the offspring for a certain amount of time, and then put them together, they'll start competing with each other for resources. We don't know how this is done yet. It's obviously something chemical. It has to be something chemical. But we don't understand it yet. What's the mechanism? There are some plants that can recognize other, and this has huge implications for us as humans, that they will not overtake other plants of the same species, but will overtake other species. It's a little scary to think of the line here between science and really good science fiction is a little fuzzy, but it's fascinating.
Could we say that they wage wars or something like that?
Well, war is our word for it, but yeah, we do. Yeah.
Thank you. Any more questions? Do we need the mic, or is it okay with this?
I'll repeat the question.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
As we talk about plants, are we talking, this is more of a philosophical question, are we talking about one plant individual, or are we talking about the population of one single species, or are we talking about annual or perennial plants, especially in case of their memory?
Okay, so the question was, and this sort of touches on what I was talking about in the other question, are we talking about one plant? Are we talking about a population? Are we talking about annuals versus perennials? And how do we look at this? And so the answer is depending on, first of all, what type of scientist you are. I am looking at an individual plant, and I'm actually looking at a stupid plant. I'm looking at a Arabidopsis, and why do I say it's a stupid plant? A Arabidopsis is a self-fertilizing plant. Because it's a self-fertilizing plant, it doesn't really care what's going on around it, what's going on in its neighbors. It's only dependent on itself. Now, this is my own interpretation. Again, another piece of research that was done by a colleague of mine in Israel at Ben-Gurion University, what he showed is that if you take a plant and take its roots and daisy chain them between two plots, okay? Split them up, 2 pots. Now take another plant, put half its roots in the pot with the first plant, half its roots in the second pot. Now keep doing this until you have 6 pots, 5 plants. Add salt to the first one. The last plant responds as if it's been exposed to salt. Okay? He found that you could actually take the roots from the first plant, something's being taken out of those roots, add it to the last plant, and they will also respond as if it's been exposed to drought. So it's showing some type of communication. Now, we don't know here if it's this part of the root trying to communicate with this part, or 2 plants actually communicating. But what he's found, and other people have found, is that the more a plant is dependent on its neighbors, the more complex the response is, the higher the memory. A plant that is an outcrosser, that is dependent on pollen coming from another of its species, it makes sense that it will have evolved different sensory capabilities than one that's more, I don't want to use the word autistic, but self-absorbed. So yeah, it really depends if you're looking at annuals or perennials, and if you're looking at outcrosses or incrossers. And that's one of the things that we as plant biologists have to now start doing. For the past 20 years, plant biology has been dominated by the study of Arabidopsis. And that's good, because we found incredible molecular mechanisms that could not have been found by studying wild plants. But over the past 10 years, technologies have developed, especially genomic technologies, which is called next-generation sequencing, which we can now take what we've learned from Arabidopsis and start looking at what's going on in the field, in nature.
Any more questions?
Okay.
Can I have one?
Sure.
Not the last one, I hope. So we are in the Science Center, actually Center for Promotion of Science. So I was always wondering what inspires excellent researchers to engage in science promotion or write a book that is actually popular science. So you said it was a New Year resolution, but what happened?
So now look, first of all, I think we as scientists in general have done a really poorly job of engaging the community. A lot of this is because of our own fear of feeling that we're cheapening our science or that we're selling out. The Secret Life of Plants did a huge disservice to plant biology that people were petrified about being associated with it, and not realizing that anthropomorphic terminology enables the public to identify with the plant. So, for 20, 30 years, my colleagues and I were petrified about actually trying to do this. I myself was petrified about how the book would be received, not by the public. I was more concerned about by my colleagues. That's number one. Number two, on the other hand, I like writing. And I was just curious, could I write a book that would be accessible? Now, you might say the answer is yes, but I'm actually going to say that the answer is maybe. Because this book, the connection between what you read and what I first wrote is really far. I had two incredible helpers. One is my agent, Lori Abkemeyer, who did the first editing, and the second was my editor at Scientific American, Amanda Moon. And each chapter went through about 10 iterations, where she took my really obtuse scientific writing. We like to write in large sentences. We like to qualify everything we say. And she had to teach me that the general public doesn't like qualifications. You want clear-cut sentences and clear-cut answers. And we had major arguments through the writing, but she was right. She was definitely right. And so what you're reading here, you could say I'm a great writer. She was a great editor. And editors don't usually get the credit for the book. Yeah.
Thank you.
Do you maybe have some new idea for a book? Something completely different?
Well, someone once told me I should write a book about what a plant doesn't know. But no, I want to get back to my own research for a while. Thanks. Yeah.
Any more questions? Okay.
Once you gather the group of the multidisciplinary researchers, the businessmen, the government, the economics, and everybody, do you plan to tackle the problem of the GMO haters? Because
Well, that's not, well, okay, that might be my next book. So the question is, once I've been interdisciplinary, do I intend to attack the problem of the GMO haters, genetically modified organism, GMO plant, GMO food haters? This is part of my evolution as a biologist doing public outreach. At the beginning, I was very reticent about making a public stand, okay? Because I was afraid that people would stop listening. In my first Coursera class and in my book, I really don't touch on it. I mention it a little bit, but I really take a very soft approach. I would say now a very scared approach, a very weak approach. In my second class, I had the whole last lecture is about genetic engineering and agriculture. Because I think that we as scientists have an obligation to say what is right and what is known and what is not known. What is scientific and what is not scientific. And if we're not willing to say it, we've left the arena open to the kooks. And I will say that like that. And I will say here that there is no evidence whatsoever that genetic modification is dangerous to any organism. If you think, the best experiment, the best publication was 2 years ago. I think it was 2 years ago. So there's been GMO corn used in the United States for the past 20 years. That means every cow almost in the United States has been fed GMO corn. Now, if everything you read about genetic modification is true, these cows should be dying like flies. Their yield should be nothing. And I want to tell you about something about farmers. Farmers are interested in only one thing: profit. If this technology was killing their cattle, they wouldn't be using it. Farmers are smart people, and they're connected to what they're doing. That's number one. Number two, why is GMO not dangerous? Because a gene is a gene is a gene is a gene. It's a chemical that has 4 bases, GATC, and it's called a universal code for a reason, because it's universal. At the level of DNA, there's no difference between a corn gene, a tomato gene, or a human gene. It's just an instruction. It's a piece of DNA. Can bad things be done with a technology? Bad things can be done with any technology. I mean, how many people here have cell phones? Is there someone here who doesn't have a cell phone? Really? Now, do you know that this cell phone isn't giving you brain cancer? Do you know that? You know, I've heard lots of things, you know, but we use it because it makes our life better. There was a publication today that showed that 20 years ago, I don't know the exact, the yield between corn yields in the United States and Europe were 20 bushels per acre. Today, the difference is 40 bushels per acre in favor of America. Why is that? Only because of GMO regulation in Europe versus GMO regulation in the United States. The only way that we will maintain these gains in yield is by using every technology available to us. It doesn't mean that GMO is the answer for everything. I'm not saying that. But if I can make a strain, I'll give you an example. And this is research that was done in our institute funded by the Gates Foundation. There's this huge problem in wheat growth, a pest, a fungus that's called UG99. It's wheat rust that was discovered in Uganda. Now the problem with fungus, the spores go in the air. It started in Uganda, it started spreading all around the world. And the problem with this rust is that there was no known resistance. It was decimating wheat yields throughout Africa and now into Asia, and it could have reached, and it can reach India soon. If I have an ability to engineer resistance using genetic modification, and we've isolated a resistance gene from a wild relative of wheat that grows wild in Israel, withholding that technology is morally unforgivable. If I have a technology that will allow people to have more food, and I'm withholding that technology for some type of religious reason, that's morally reprehensible. If we can make today peanuts that are hyperallergenic, I mean, people die from peanuts. We haven't made peanuts illegal. You know, people die from lots of things. No one has died from GMO. And you have to separate genetic modification from business practices. These are two different things. As a technology, GMO is fine. You want to talk about how businesses are used, how patenting is used? That's an economic discussion. It's not a scientific discussion. And the last thing is, scientists, we have to make sure that the public understands is there's no such thing as natural. There's no such thing as not genetically modified. I mean, I'll give you a thought experiment. I did this once on television. It worked perfectly. I was working with someone who was vehemently against GMO. If I give you the choice of eating the wild, natural tomato that comes from the Andes in Peru, okay? A wild, natural tomato, and a tomato that's made by Monsanto, what will you choose to eat? Who would choose the wild, natural one? Okay, thank you. Unfortunately, you die because the wild, natural one is poisonous or you get really sick. Anything we eat in agriculture that we grow is a result of hundreds of years of human intervention in the gene pool of the crops. You know, what's the difference between a weed and a crop? A weed is something that we want to kill and can't. You know? A crop is something we want to grow, but weeds take over it, and we have to be very picky at it. So our crops are very sensitive. You know? All of our crops are not natural. It's not natural for wheat to have such a big head. You know? It's not natural for rice to have so many seeds. We've induced these genetic modifications. So there's no such thing as natural. Things are evolving and being evolved all the time. And in agriculture, we've done the modification ourselves. Thanks for the question. Sorry, you can see I'm passionate about it.
Yeah, and
thanks. Yeah, I think that's it.
Okay, thank you for this
I
powerful,
want to see the
powerful statement at the end, and I think this was the excellent opportunity to listen why it is important for scientists to take a stand and fight for their science, actually. I would like to invite you for the book signing now. We will give Danny a 5 minutes rest, just to freshen up a bit. If you don't have a book, we have it on a special discount. But before you go, I want to say a special thank you. This is a bit emotional for me. Yeah, I want to thank the whole Center for Promotion of Science, but especially the team, Anna, Diana, the other Anna, Boris, Mira, David, and newcomer Nemanja and Daniela, for making everything happen and be so hardworking and so creative, and I think we did an excellent job. So feel free to look around, be part of our exhibition, and be part of our program for the next 2 weeks. Thank you for coming.